Let me ask you something. When your kids have a problem, I mean a real one, who do they go to? Think about that honestly for a second because here's what I've noticed. Kids almost never choose randomly. Before they even open up their mouth, they already know exactly what parent they're going to go to. They already know who's going to listen and who's going to lecture, who's going to stay calm and who's going to escalate, who's going to make them feel heard and who's going to make them feel like they did something wrong. They know. They've always known. And in a lot of homes, especially the homes with a dad who's a provider or a fixer or a decision maker, there's a quiet little rule that the kids have figured out. Don't tell dad. Not out of rebellion, not because they don't love you, because somewhere along the way they've learned what happens when they do. And today I want to talk about what happens and more importantly, how to change it. My name is Bruce Pelton. I'm a father of 3 boys and somebody who spent a long time being a parent my kids filtered their conversations around without even knowing that it was happening. This channel is about being honest with ourselves as fathers, not to tear each other down, but because real change starts with real honest look at the patterns that we've created. And this topic, why kids go to one parent and not the other, is one of the most common and least talked about family dynamics. So let's get into it. I remember the moment that I first noticed this with my own boys, and I want to be clear, it wasn't a dramatic moment. Nobody sat me down, nobody had a conversation with me about it. I just started paying attention, and I mean really paying attention. And I noticed that certain questions came to me directly, like logistics or decisions or anything that needed to get done around the house or figured out. Dad was great for that. But the other conversations, the one with some emotional attachment to them, like some risk or vulnerability, those weren't coming to me. And at first I told myself, well, kids go to mom sometimes. That's just how it is. But the more I watched, the more I realized it wasn't random. There was a pattern. And when I really got honest with myself about what that pattern was connected to, it was uncomfortable. The conversations they avoided bringing me were almost always the ones that might involve correction, disappointment, friction, or a lecture. Because a lot of times when my kids brought me something stressful, my first reaction wasn't curiosity, it was frustration, or problem solving, or correction. Sometimes before they even finished explaining what happened, and the kids learn fast. After enough of those conversations, they stop bringing you the things that might trigger that reaction. Not consciously, not as a punishment, just instinctively or emotionally. And they move towards safety and away from friction, just as we do as adults. Now, before I go any further, and I'm dropping this here intentionally, because if you're watching this and you're already feeling a little called out right now, I put together something that goes even deeper into this, and it's my free guide that's called The 5 Mistakes Fathers Make That Push Their Kids Away. And we're talking about a lot of that right now, because the friction parent without realizing it, that's one of them. The link is in the description. Go grab it, it's free, and it's worth 5 minutes of your time. Now, let's keep going. Because here's where it gets really interesting. This isn't just a dad problem. This can happen to either parent, and understanding why it happens gives you the power to actually change it. Think about what your kids are actually doing every single day inside your home. They're not just growing, they're learning. And one of the most important things that they're learning is, whether you realize it or not, is the emotional pathways. Which parent helps me feel heard? Which parent makes me feel ashamed? Which parent stays calm when things get hard? Which parent escalates before I even finish talking? Which parent turns every conversation into a life lesson that I didn't ask for? They're mapping all of this out consistently, quietly, and accurately. And I started thinking about parenting a lot like growing a bonsai tree. When a tree is young, you let it grow naturally for a while. Then you start trimming it. You start shaping it into the direction it's going. And sometimes you wire certain branches into a position because if left completely alone, the tree grows wild in directions and eventually becomes unhealthy. And parenting works a lot like that. Children are constantly adapting to the emotional environment around them, and parents are shaping that environment every single day, whether they realize it or not. Our reactions matter, our tone matters, our consistency matter. The emotional safety inside of our home matters, because eventually children stop responding to our intentions and they start responding to our patterns. That's the part that most parents miss. We judge ourselves by what we meant to do, but our kids experience us through what we actually do repeatedly, over and over again, until it becomes the one thing that they expect from us. And I want to tell you about the moment that this really landed for me personally, because it's the one thing to understand with this concept, and it's another thing to see it clearly in your own home. There was a stretch of time where I had to become, without even deciding to, what I now call the friction parent. Not because I didn't love my kids, I did. I loved them deeply. And not because I was trying to be harsh or unapproachable, but because I was tired, I was stressed, I was carrying a lot. And when you're carrying a lot, your communication gets compressed. You don't have time or bandwidth for a long version of the conversation. So a lot of my responses became shorter, more corrective, more directive, less curious, less patient, less warm, more fix it, handle it, and here's what you should have done. And after enough of that repetition, my kids adapted. They started making decisions before they came to me. Is this something that Dad's going to be stressed out about? Is this going to be turning into another lecture? Is it worth even bringing this up? And a lot of times the answer that they landed on was no, just don't tell Dad. And that realization hit hard for me. Because as parents, we almost always judge ourselves by our intentions, but our kids aren't experiencing our intentions. They're experiencing our behavior, our patterns, our repeated reactions. And those two things, what we meant to do and what we wanted to do, aren't the same thing. So here's the part that fathers miss most, because everything I just described, the filtering, the friction, the emotional distance, none of that is permanent. Communication pathways inside a family are absolutely rebuildable, but it starts with awareness. And it starts with some honest questions. The first question is, do my kids feel emotionally safe to bring me problems? Not just the easy ones, the real ones, the messy ones, the ones where they might be wrong. If the answer is no, or even maybe, that's where the work starts. The second question is, do you listen before you correct? Because there's a version of being a good parent that feels like a courtroom to your kids. Evidence presented, judgment delivered, lesson administered. And there's another version where your kids walk away from the conversation feeling like you were actually in their corner. Even if the outcome was still the same, even if they still had to be accountable for it, but the difference is whether or not they felt heard first. That one shift alone, listening fully before correcting, changes the entire emotional experience your kids take away from you when they come to you. The third question is, am I always showing up as the authority figure instead of the relationship? Because authority is important and structure matters. Accountability matters, but kids don't always open up to authority figures. They open up to relationships. And the most powerful thing you can be as a father is both. The dad who holds the line and the dad who actually wants to talk. Those two things are not mutually exclusive, but you have to be intentional in building both of them. And practically speaking, here's what they look like day to day. It looks like staying calm longer when it feels natural to do something and correct it. It looks like asking one more question before you react. It looks like making your kid feel heard before you make them feel corrected. None of these are complicated, but they require consistency. Because you're not just having one better conversation, you're building a new pattern. And new patterns take repetition in place of old ones. But here's what I know. It works. When kids start to experience a different version of you consistently, a version that listens, stays calm, and makes them feel safe, they start bringing things to you again. Slowly at first, testing it, making sure that it's real, and then more, and then the real stuff. And that's where the relationship changes. I want to come back to where we started, that quiet rule that a lot of kids have figured out in their homes, like don't tell dad. I want you to think about whether that rule exists in your house. Not to make you feel bad, but to make you feel motivated. Because if it does exist, you have the power to change it. Not by demanding that your kids open up to you, not by making a big conversation about communication, but by quietly and consistently becoming a parent that they feel safe coming to. One interaction at a time. One stayed calm moment at a time. One tell me more instead of here's what you should have done at a time. That's how the rule changes. That's how don't tell dad becomes let's go talk to dad. And that shift, quiet as it is, changes everything about your relationships with your kids. Drop a comment below. Have you noticed this dynamic in your home? Which parent do your kids go to first, and why do you think that is? Because I think a lot of fathers are sitting with this quietly, and there's real value in talking about it. Because life isn't hacked, it's built. And I'll see you in the next one.